we're going to see a disproportionate number of winners and losers. We're going to see a concentration of IAP spend in less games.
Where is in-app spend going in 2024? Hello and welcome to Growth Masterminds. My name is John Koetsier. It's tough out there. Inflation is still high. Ad revenue is underpacing GDP, and GDP growth is softening in key countries, including the United States. So what can we expect from in-app payers in 2024? Well, Mistplay did a huge report on this recently, and we're chatting with CEO Jason Heller. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me, John. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. I think it's the second time.
It
So
is.
pumped to have you. You must have done well the first time. I mean, we don't have losers back.
haven't kicked me off yet.
Haven't kicked you off yet. Exactly.
Still time.
Tell us about the report. What's it based on? You have over 2 million people in your cadre that you're taking data from. Is that correct? I mean, it's a massive number.
Yeah, Mistplay is a community of gamers, and we tend to focus on trying to acquire, engage, and nurture spenders, and drive those spenders to games that are interesting for them. So it's kind of a win-win all around. And we just felt, anecdotally, it feels like 2023, 2024 in particular, like you mentioned, the macroeconomic dynamics are changing a little bit. And we wanted to do a service to the industry. This is actually the first of a longitudinal study. So we intend to do this every year and take a look at the, different trends and how users are spending, and help publishers understand that better and give them more competitive advantage.
Cool. So let's dive in. What's up with spend in 2024? What are you seeing?
So, based on our research, we surveyed a lot of our users, and, the general sentiment is that spend is going to decrease and also concentrate. And what that means is that, the era of, I don't want to call it free lunch, let's call it inexpensive lunch. Where, it's really easy to drive user acquisition, sort of cast this wide net. And, there was just a lot for everybody to feed off of, a lot of investment dollars in the mobile gaming space. We're going to see a disproportionate number of winners and losers. We're going to see concentration of IAP spend in less games. So we're going to have less winners, frankly. And the companies who position themselves to be able to understand what's driving the motivation of spend and how to engage users in a personalized and relevant way over time, they're going to get their, fair share and then some. And others are, probably going to feel a little bit of pain in the next year or two.
So you're obviously basing it on data that you're seeing from what's going on in the market, from your users. You're also asking them what they're planning to do, what they're thinking of doing. And many of them said, as you mentioned, I'm probably going to spend less.
Mm-hmm.
How likely do you think those intentions are to be real and to be actual in the moment? Because often your purchase decisions, especially an in-app purchase, it's not exactly rational, right? You didn't plan it out for 5 years and think about the best way. You needed something, you wanted something, you did something. So how likely do you think that people's intentions will be accurate about their reality?
It's a great question. Usually people overestimate their intentions, not underestimate. So, if we're asking and people are telling us that they're going to spend less, I definitely expect them to spend less. I think, the, escapism, the sort of spontaneous spending that we've seen in the past, what we're hearing from gamers is that they're just going to take a more concerted approach, and they're going to be more thoughtful about where they spend. We already know that, spenders are concentrating their spend even today, even the last handful of years, in just a couple of games at a time. So it's not like, people are downloading tons of games and spending in all of those games. There's a very common behavior where, there's one or two games that people spend in and they continue to play until they get bored, and then eventually they discover a new game. I just think we're going to see a lot more focused effort And by the way, if you look at other research, not in our report, but I've read numerous studies that actually show spend in apps outside of gaming actually increasing. And so it's an
Mhm.
interesting dynamic where the mobile gaming industry has kind of been in this pole position the last few years. And still is, by the way, but things are changing a little bit.
That is super true, and it's really interesting because I spoke recently at MAU, Mobile Apps Unlocked, and we looked at all the industries where spend is growing. And a lot of them were like entertainment apps,
Yeah.
anything streaming stuff. A lot of them were health and fitness, and they were
Hmm.
doing some really amazing things. Some were in the business focus, some were in education, those sorts of things. Gaming was up too, but it was just 8%. It wasn't the 20% or the 30% that we saw in some other categories.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a bit of a shift there. It is
Mhm.
definitely in the post-COVID times, and that that amount of time that we had and the willingness to spend are a little different. I do want to talk about this multiple apps thing because that was one of the most
Mhm.
interesting things that I saw in your report. How many apps people spend in, and I'm probably an outlier here. There's literally one app. I
Mhm.
mean, I buy subscriptions on a bunch of things like Apple One and all that stuff, but there's literally one gaming app that I'll every 2 months or
Mhm.
so when I'm like, I gotta get this, I'll spend something, right? And so, what's the frequency there?
Obviously there's no single answer to that, but if you do take sort of an average view on it, uh, people who spend money in games do tend to follow a similar kind of pattern where there's one game, sometimes two games that they're spending in simultaneously. Now, a spender tends to be a spender, right? So if you're the kind of person who enjoys the progression in a game, or tends to respond to incentivized offers, you'll probably do that over time. But the number of games that you might have done that in 2 years ago versus the number of games that you might do that in this year or next year is going to be lower. We don't like using this phrase, but I know the gaming industry talks about whales, right? The very
Mhm.
small percentage of users who spend the vast majority of IAP spend. And if you like really segment your spenders into, your top, high value spenders, mid value spenders, low value spenders, the behaviors are really different as well. Some of the big spenders are really spending, a significant amount in games, and the patterns are different by category. There's, kind of a upfront onboarding period, and then you see kind of a big like spike in spend, and then you see it wane, and eventually there's some churn signals if you look at your data really well. And
Mhm.
for a company like ours, at least, we're in the luxurious position of helping uh kind of helping users discover their next game once they get to that point. Obviously, while they're engaging in the game, our goal is to actually help drive the progression and drive, more spend. But um, if you don't have a next experience to deliver to a user when their activity starts to wane, you're going to lose them. And that's where a lot of publishers, at least the smarter publishers, they're spending their time and effort in figuring out, how do we keep these users? And progression is thankfully, one of the core reasons why users spend in the game is they actually enjoy and get fulfillment out of the progression.
Mhm, mhm. I wanna talk about that UA aspect in a bit, and there's a couple questions I wanna talk about there. Let's talk about personalization,
Hmm.
first in terms of purchases, and I was just talking to somebody else who was in the loyalty space, and I was showing the app, the game that I tend to play, and many of the offers that I get, first of all, I get 3 every time I
Hmm.
open the game, so I'm being trained to close them.
Hmm.
Secondly, uh, I'm getting offers for stuff I don't use, I
Hmm.
don't play in, right? And sometimes I've played this game for a year, and it's vast, there's many parts of it. There's parts of it I never touch, so I'm like,
Hmm.
"What is this? Why would I buy that?" Talk about personalization for those offers.
Yeah. What's the game that you like to play, by the way?
This
Am I putting you
is
on the spot in that one?
exactly, Alien something or other. I gotta find it. Oh, and it doesn't even show the name, just the icon, so I can't even tell you. Alien Invaders, something or other. I'll find it. I'll put it over later on.
Okay, you look like an Alien Invaders kind of guy,
Do I?
uh, for whatever that means. Um, Personalization is a really interesting topic. I think, whether it's in gaming, outside of gaming, I think the average company is, fairly early in their maturity cycle and journey in personalization. Um, the personalization could be as broad or as narrow as the capabilities and explicit intention to develop
Mhm,
a
mhm.
competitive advantage, to drive these types of experiences. And by the way, you mentioned offers, but personalization is a lot more than just offers, right? So if you
Yep.
you think about sort of a live ops perspective and different channels, whether it's in app, whether it's push notification, email, and even social channels, to pull people back in. Um, taking the signal of or the signals of what users are doing in the game, the amount of time that they spend, the lag time between one purchase and another, how they respond to different parts of the experience. You're taking all of those signals, and then it really becomes a data science exercise to create,
Mhm,
the sort of predictive accuracy to deliver an experience and offer that's actually relevant and desirable to the user. We've all experienced bad personalization in general, right? Like whether
mhm.
it's an e-commerce app or website, whether it's a game. I mean, you mentioned a couple of examples. Um, this is an area that requires explicit investment in data science capabilities. It's an area, by the way. I mean, we've really explicitly decided, we are going to compete in the data science realm. We've started to experiment with, self-learning AI models and reinforcement learning, which is, kind of like the, bleeding edge of what's driving these types of experiences today. But the average company is still very early in this journey. We do know that uh, personalized offers, personalized experiences have a disproportionate impact on the desired outcomes, whether that outcome is engagement or a transaction, depending on the type of game you are. But it's one of those areas that, I think, companies need to just decide this is an area that's going to create competitive advantage. And therefore we're going to invest in, really building the data science capabilities, bringing on the people, the tools, the digital transformation that's required on the back end. It's a lot to it. And most people don't realize how much there is, to actually make that work.
I searched up in the App Store because the icon doesn't really have the information, but it's Galaxy Attack Alien Shooter.
There
That
we
is
go.
the game right there. Uh, let's talk about bonuses. Like I won't ever buy the default, a standard offer, but if there's a bonus like extra crystals or extra whatever, then that is an incentive to do it. And then I have to think about it. And will my wife notice the charge on the credit card? All that stuff. Bonuses, how important are they?
I just bucket that into incentives in general. There's financial incentives, there's status based incentives. None of us are reinventing this wheel.
Hmm.
Um, Bonuses and incentives work, and being able to predict, when in a journey and to what degree you're going to, provide a bonus or incentive is part of the capabilities, that we just discussed in terms of, where to sort of focus data science efforts.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's also, a technology component to it as well. There's sort of
Hmm.
a offer management piece to it, and, life cycle and live ops management. But, these are, proven mechanisms. And, it's interesting, uh, I'm a little bit of a scholar on loyalty sometimes. I like to, dig into, some of the experiments and, even the, sort of academic work. There's an interesting concept that um, if you stagger the incentives and you make it more sort of serendipitous, you get a much greater response than if every time you go into an app, there's going to be a 10% offer, there's going to be an offer of X.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and it's really interesting because, this sort of, again, this sort of serendipity of, not
Mhm.
knowing if I'm going to get an offer at all. Is it going to be a good
Mhm.
offer? Is it going to be a bad offer? Is the next one going to be better? It's part of like the behavioral economics of loyalty. And,
Yep.
as it's funny, as a loyalty platform, we have to constantly remind ourselves and our clients in the industry, like, loyalty, is it's not a verb, it's an outcome, right? And that it's an outcome that comes from being able to understand user behavior, predict what people are going to respond to, and then ensure the most relevant experience for them. And again, we've all experienced when that doesn't go well, probably more than when it does.
Yeah, we don't
And
notice
frankly,
it
when
when
it
it goes well, right?
yeah,
We
and
don't
when
notice
it does,
it then.
you usually don't really feel it, right? Like
Mhm.
that's sort of the
Mhm.
magic of it. It just feels natural.
Mhm. Yep. It brings something to mind, right? Because loyalty is not monetization. They're related, but they're different topics, right? Loyalty is hanging around, sticking around, continuing.
Mhm.
Monetization is something that happens when that occurs in many cases, but not
Mhm.
every case. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, they could also be orthogonal sometimes, right? I mean, again, loyalty is an outcome, right? Like I'm loyal because I truly appreciate the experience, the benefit, the value prop. Um, monetization happens along that journey. Monetization happens before loyalty
Mhm.
and after loyalty, and it
The
looks
funny
different in both of those parts of the journey.
the funny thing is though, and I forget who told this to me, but it was somebody who's made games, I think for side play or others for that tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions have played. He says having a user in a game is about keeping them between being happy and unhappy, like miserable and ecstatic, right? It's like, I love this game, I hate this game. And somebody else told me just recently, like a month ago, another UA guy, do you know anybody who loves the publishers of the game they play? Right? They may love the game or they may
Mhm.
be loyal in the game because the game is
Yeah.
addictive and they
Yep.
get something out of the game, but they're always pissed off at the publishers because the publishers want money or they lose too frequently or other
Yeah.
things like that. It's an interesting balance and you've got to sort of conduct that orchestra
Yeah.
as a loyalty platform, correct?
Yeah. The great thing, what I really love from our perch is we get to truly see user behavior in its rawest form. We see what inspires users, what motivates them, what drives their continued play, what makes them churn, how they engage against, or across different genres and subgenres of games. And it's fascinating, right? The whole industry is fascinating. And, the just amount of engagement, the proximity of user acquisition to engagement to churn, all one click away from each other, one tap away from each other. It's fairly unique to our industry. I have a fairly deep e-commerce background, and some of the dynamics in mobile gaming. On the one hand, there's like incredible day 30 churn of new users,
Mhm.
which like an
Mhm.
e-commerce company would go out of business with that churn rate. On the other hand, like the degree of engagement and transaction velocity is something to be incredibly envious of. And so, you look at those dynamics in terms of the how to run a business around it. And it's it's a magical business to operate when you have options. Um, it's expensive to build games. I don't really envy independent game developers who have to spend millions and millions of dollars on a single bet of one game that needs to sort of propel them into the future. Some publishers do that really, really well, by the way, and other publishers, really struggle with that, and that's what's
Mhm.
going to get harder. So, in our
Mhm.
spend report, we talk about the sort of disparity of winners and losers. There's so many companies that have put, years of development into something, that, that one bet is going to make or break, the rest of the business. And we're gonna see many more breaks than makes, I think, in the coming years.
Go big or go home. Yeah, high risk stuff. Okay, let's segue then, because part of what you were talking about there was, the churn and the seeing what happens. Let's talk about wooing a new player, because that's tough, right? You've got the people you really want
Hmm.
are the people who spend money.
Hmm.
People who spend money often go deep in a game, and they spend
Yeah.
half a year, 2 years in game. I mean, you're talking Supercell, you've got players that have been there for,
Yep.
closing on a decade, right? Rovio has players that have played Angry Birds for
Yep.
over a decade, and they're still playing, and they're loving it, and it's their go-to, right? So you want these types of people who spend and who stick, but the more they spend and stick in one game, the harder it is to get them to another
Hmm.
game. What does that take? You're a loyalty platform. Part of what you want is you want people to keep people inside your games, but you're also saying, hey, here's a new experience. Here's a new experience. What does it take to get somebody to jump ship, leave everything they built, leave everything they bought, and go over here?
Yeah. I mean, first, it's an and, it's not an or. Um, you're right. First of all, the product market fit and, extension of life cycle of some of these games is staggering. I think Coin Master you can also put in that bucket. I think they're coming on 7 or 8 years now and still going incredibly strong. Um, there's a very small number of games that, people will discover, explore, and then, even less will spend in. If I haven't done this exercise, but I guarantee you, if you add up the number of, UA installs across the gaming industry every month, you can, probably, plaster the entire population of the earth, several times over. People are discovering games and, yeah, there's a segment of people who get hooked on a game like yours and, maybe they never download another one and, they don't really care to discover or explore.
I
But,
have found the one true game. I will never need another game my entire life.
so somebody deserves a sponsorship, John. Um,
Tattoo.
but there, I mean, thankfully for the whole industry, right? There's a really, really large segment of people who, play multiple games and kind of,
Mhm, mhm.
migrate from one to another. I think, there's something really special about some of the titles that we're talking about, like Angry Birds and others that just have like this massive, massive life cycle. I mean, I still
Mhm.
I still have like 5 different versions of Angry Birds on my phone. And every so often
That
I
was
find
truly sick.
and every so often I find myself playing it just because, it's, the games do have product market fit. I mean, they're engaging and, if you play them I mean, it's funny. I'm thinking about like, when's the last time I played Angry Birds? It's probably been a long time ago and it probably will now be sometime later this evening.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
that doesn't preclude me from discovering the next set of games, particularly when I'm being bombarded by
Yeah.
user acquisition and,
But it
word of
puts
mouth
the
from friends, right?
bar pretty high
It
to
does.
not just jump into that game, play it for a few
Yep.
levels, but then stick, right?
It
It's
does.
gotta be really insanely good
Yes,
and quickly good to get me 5, 6, 10, 15 levels in and saying, "Hey,
exactly.
this is now in my daily rotation," or maybe this becomes my daily driver, right? So
Exactly.
that's a
Here's an interesting insight that came out of our study. I thought this was one of the ones that kind of made me think a little bit. Users who download a game because they've heard about it on social or word of mouth from a friend, it drives installs. It does not drive purchases. So when you have this mindset of like, okay, birds of a feather, right? Like if John's playing this alien game and he sends it to me, which I'm sure you will later tonight, I'm going to download it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to enjoy it. It doesn't mean that I'm going to spend money in it. It does mean that because I trust you and we have some, like-mindedness, I'm probably going to explore it. I thought that was a really interesting um, uh, tidbit, just because when you talk to game publishers and marketers at game publishers, there is like a tribal knowledge that, referrals drives like-minded people. And that
Mhm.
may be true to some degree, but at the end of the day, if you look at this like at scale across like the whole industry, it's an interesting dynamic that, social referrals and referrals from friends drives installs, but doesn't necessarily drive any meaningful increase in,
That
additional
does not
spenders.
really surprise me because often these social referrals are incentivized. And so
Yes.
you'll
Yep.
win something, you'll get something if you
Yep.
send it over to 5 people or something
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
And then I think the thought process is much more complex than I'll send it to somebody who I think will like the game. I think the thought
Yep.
process is who can I send this to who won't get pissed off? And I'm sending them something that clearly I'm getting something for if
Yep.
I give them to them. So that's a different dynamic
Yeah, that's true.
than who
That's
do I
true.
think will love this game and will be a huge player of this game, and I want them on my team or in my clan or something like
Yep.
that. And
Yep.
that's a different world. And that's interesting if you think about it. If you're going to make a social referral, how can you get more of that and less of the, okay, I'll send it to
Yeah.
somebody who, doesn't really matter what right?
Yeah. I mentioned something earlier about progression. One of the insights from our study, which I think is a, a real solid one for publishers who are serious about creating games that, just really resonate. Progression is one of the biggest drivers of spend. It's the fulfillment of progression. It's the rewarding nature of continuation of the game. Not all progression loops are made well, and the ones that are, and I mean, it's funny if you look at like the Sensor Tower top, let's call it 100, 200 games by IAP revenue. I mean, that's almost a testament to product market fit, right? Great games, great live ops capabilities, great, great incentives and IAP packages, great, loyalty mechanisms in one way or another. And maybe not formally like we do it, but, um, that's a formula, right? If you go
Mhm.
down that list, what you'll see is the companies that are the highest on the list spend the most in UA because they can afford it, because more users convert and more users spend because they've got great games. And they have great games because they've got great progression loops. And that is, I think that um, that should be a very positive piece that comes out of the study, at least for those who are very serious about making games that people really enjoy.
The thing that comes to mind when you say progression, which is a crazy interesting thing to think about your core loop and progression, needing to finish and everything like that, is the movie The Accountant with Ben Affleck. I don't know if you've seen that, but he's a high functioning autistic and he needs to finish things.
Hmm. Yeah.
He can't leave it unfinished.
Yeah.
He's got to complete it, right?
Yes.
And so that desire, that need drives a lot of behavior.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways it's basic human nature. I think, um, the last handful of years of just sort of rampant, mobile gaming, user acquisition and discovery and exploration. I think people have, really just become accustomed to trying to find the games that really resonate. And if you look at the different categories, right, of some of the casual categories versus the strategy categories versus like, the hyper casual categories, like the user behavior is so different, the progression is very different. The life cycle of the users are different. The churn rates are very different. And if you dissected it, it really all comes down to, sort of the core game loop and how users are engaged.
It's funny because in gaming, I think that is a really, really big piece. And I think there's another piece that is big for in-app purchases, probably not as much for gaming, although maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to test my hypothesis with you. And so there's progression. There's also acquisition. And when I think of acquisition, I think of the number of movies I've bought on
Hmm.
Apple TV Plus that I have not yet watched.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good deal. I'll get that. Oh, that'll be great. I'll get that, right? Oh, it's only $5.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, do you see that in gaming at all, or is that more in different genres?
I think that's a little more in different genres. I mean, there's, like a little FOMO sometimes on, um, uh, you know, like virtual goods and
Mhm. Mhm.
but that's not a huge part of it's just not a huge part of what's driving the upper echelon of IAP driven games. It really is the core game loop. It's the the mechanics of the items that you buy or the coins or whatever currency that you buy. It's all part of the progression loop. I think the um, digital hoarding is probably left for other categories.
I think you're probably right on that. And I don't know if it's part of progression or not, but the desire to win. That's what motivates me to buy something because I'm losing too frequently. I need some more power.
Yeah.
I need something. I have to I I have I have to bring this to a close, but there's something I wanna chat about before we finish that, and I was just at MAU, I was talking to a member of your team, you guys were at MAU, you had a presentation partially on some of these topics as well, um, and at Mobile Apps Unlocked in Vegas last week, you couldn't turn around without hitting a loyalty
Hmm.
club, loyalty company. The loyalty space is exploding. Why is that?
We have been around for going on almost 8 years. We've been one of the pioneers of the space. We take our brand very seriously. We take engaging users very seriously. We've seen a number of startups launch. Just in the last year, 18
Mhm,
months.
mhm,
I think everybody takes a bit of a different approach. I mean, generally in any business, in any category, whenever people see dollar signs, they tend to run to it. I think, a number of companies will realize it's not that easy. Like I said, loyalty is an outcome. It's not a, flash in the pan. And, we, tend to take a, rising tides lift all ships kind of
mhm.
attitude. Um, it's great when, I personally go and meet with some of our clients with our sales team. Um, you know, there's a loyalty and incentive category now. And sometimes they kind of bucket this category with offer walls, which we don't always enjoy.
Yep,
I think we take community super seriously, as opposed to just, like having like, the loyalty mechanism out there. But look, UA is becoming more expensive, more complicated. I think that will
mhm,
continue to be true. And so, driving loyalty and finding loyal users and the mechanisms that engage those users, not just acquire them, is going to become increasingly important to publishers. So I think publishers are just more open to these
mhm.
categories. I can't speak to the quality level of the industry. I mean, there certainly are rumblings of questionable quality. That's kind of something we have to navigate because we take our integrity and quality incredibly seriously. Um, and it's I think it's only going to continue, and I think just like and any other growing subsection of a industry, you're gonna have winners and losers, and you're gonna have different phases of growth. And I think we're kind of in a I'm not going to call it a gold rush because it certainly is not that per se, but um,
It's a
you know,
silver rush,
it's
copper
a
rush,
yeah,
something rush.
it's a silicon rush.
Excellent. Well, yeah, UA is getting more expensive. It is getting more complicated. It's getting less measurable. There are some ways to get around all those different things, but you know what? Keeping what you have is always a great strategy, whether you're in retail or whether you're in gaming or some other type of app. Jason, I want to thank you for your time and wish you the very best.
Thanks, John. Always a pleasure.
You bet.